Thanks for joining me again this morning. On May 21st, Australians voted for action on climate change. They voted for the Australian Labor government's plan, which is for 43% emissions reduction by 2030, for the national energy market to be 82% renewables by 2030, and they voted for the fully costed modelling that we had. With 604,000 new jobs to be created as a result of this plan, 5 out of every 6 of them in regional Australia. Not only did we receive a mandate for that in May, when we signed the increase for our nationally determined contribution to submit to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, we had with us extensive support. We had the Business Council of Australia, the Australian Industry Group, the group that represents Australia's manufacturers, the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, the National Farmers Federation, the Clean Energy Council, the Australian Conservation Foundation, Greenpeace, have all said that this bill should be passed. And I'm very confident that it will be passed through the House of Representatives and through the Senate. This is an opportunity to end the climate wars if the coalition decide to break with their rhetoric and actually come to the table, listen to the business community who are saying that what we need is investment certainty. We need investment certainty to get that investment in clean, cheap energy, which they know, and indeed the coalition knows, is the cheapest form of new energy going forward. So this is an opportunity for the whole of the parliament to be on the right side of history, to put aside the conflict and the arguments that came around with 22 different energy policies, not one of them implemented, and give support to the government's mandate that we received in May for the one policy that we took to the election, the one policy that we will implement.
Thanks, Prime Minister. It's a good day for Australia. It's a good day for our economy. It's a good day for our future. The climate wars may or may not be over, but they're certainly in retreat under this government. We sought a mandate from the Australian people and we're delivering on that mandate. And as the Prime Minister said, it's now very clear that our legislation will pass the Parliament. The Prime Minister and I were always clear. We did not need this legislation to get on with our agenda. But we wanted this legislation to send a message to the world that Australia is open for business when it comes to renewable energy. We wanted to provide the policy certainty, the framework for that investment, and that's exactly what this legislation will do. And today my message is particularly for Australians in the regions, in Illawarra, in the Hunter Valley, in Gladstone and Central Queensland, in Collie Bunbury, in Portland and the Latrobe Valley. This is for you. You've powered Australia for so long, and you'll power Australia into the future with renewable energy that will create thousands of jobs going forward. They will be, these regions, at the centrepiece of Australia being a renewable energy powerhouse under the Albanese government. And today is a big, big step forward in making that vision a reality.
Prime Minister, what specific undertakings did you give the Greens and crossbench MPs in relation to a possible climate trigger in the EPBC Act review and also the safeguard mechanism?
None with regard to the EPBC Act. There's been no cross-discussion about other legislation. What we have is a series of amendments will receive support where they are consistent with the policy that we took to the election. Where they're not consistent, we won't vote for it. We made our position very clear. There will be some amendments passed in the House of Representatives that are sensible, that are consistent with our position, but we also said the whole way through, the idea that you just come up with a debate about what figure's higher is something that we weren't going to engage with, because once you do that, you move away from what we did. And what we did prior to the December announcement last year was work out good policy first and then get Reputex to model what the outcome would be.
Prime Minister.
You've not been a big fan of the Greens over the years in your political...
I'm glad you've noticed that. Phil?
Do you give Mr Bandt any credit for being prepared in this occasion to put the good before the perfect and actually compromise, drop any of his demands,
Well,
unlike
look,
his predecessors?
I give everyone who's prepared to vote for moving forward, even though it's not everything that they would want, credit for doing so. The crossbenchers, the independents, Mr Bant, others have been prepared to, very clearly, as Mr Bant's made clear, not get everything that he wants, not get a whole lot of things that they want. But we were very clear, and I think this was helped also by the fact that we signed the NDC. We made it clear that that was our position. We could live with the legislation being passed or not being passed. What the legislation being passed does, though, is to lock in, as we said clearly, this is a floor, not a ceiling. So we lock in progress, and that's important. Chris?
No, that's right. Of course, we've had good conversations across the parliament with people of goodwill. As we kept saying, if people want to work with the government in goodwill, in good faith, we would do the same. Some people have made themselves irrelevant to that process. Some people have completely ruled themselves out of any discussions with the government. That's up to them. Others, on the crossbench, have factored themselves into the conversation, as the Prime Minister has said, and has been very public, where there were suggestions which could clarify, make explicit, improve the bill in keeping with our mandate, all theirs. Any suggestions not in keeping with that mandate, not considered.
Will you, though, be open to negotiating a climate trigger, particularly within the EPBC Act, considering the Greens and David Pocock in the Senate have already mentioned that they really want to see that happen?
We're dealing with today's legislation that's pretty significant. The Parliament is about to, after a decade of inaction and denial and delay, move forward. Now, the Coalition have chosen once again to engage. It's quite bizarre. They seem obsessed by nuclear reactors but are ignoring the biggest nuclear reactor of all. It's up there, the sun. Solar power they're ignoring. They're ignoring the future. They're stuck in the past. They're frozen in time while the world warms around them. We will not be held hostage to that behaviour. We'll continue to advance our agenda. And what I have said is that Australians have conflict fatigue. They want people of goodwill to work together. We will be working together on implementing the agenda to which we were elected. Andrew?
The Greens leader Adam Bant was saying today at the National Press Club that they would be using the safeguard, or endeavour to use the safeguard mechanism to stop new coal and gas projects. Is that what you're going to do with the safeguard mechanism?
No. In a word, Chris can go through.
Safeguards mechanism policy that we took to the election is the safeguards mechanism policy we will implement. Absolutely, without question, without alteration. We said we would take the safeguards mechanism architecture and put it to use, to work, to see those facilities on a trajectory to net zero. That's exactly what we will do. Hang on. I hadn't finished Andrew's answer. I was still going.
I'll give you the big tip again. Yelling out doesn't mean you get up in the queue, right? Andrew was very polite, and he got bumped up the queue.
As I was saying, we will be releasing a discussion paper on the detailed design mechanism of the safeguard mechanism probably in August. That will be out for consultation. The Greens have indicated they'll have feedback on that. And we, just like anybody else in the Parliament, are happy to receive feedback from across the Parliament.
There you go. And then I'm going to go to Greg because he got the message.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Despite supporting this bill, Adam Bant says that your government is the biggest obstacle to stronger action on climate change. That's a pretty strong criticism. How do you respond to that, and will you prove him wrong?
It's a Labor bill. It's not a Greens bill. I'm leader of the Labor Party. We have an agenda that we will implement consistent with the principles that I've always held. I'm not surprised at some of the rhetorical position, but I'll leave that to others. Today's the day where I want to acknowledge that in spite of some of that rhetorical position, people have indicated they are prepared to vote for the legislation even after their amendments are not successful, and I welcome that. Greg?
government has mounted an economic case against nuclear energy. What would be the problem with legalising the source and leaving it up to the market to decide whether it can be viable and whether those innovations can be part of the mix?
The market has decided. There is no one coming forward, nor has there been, every time there has been reviews into nuclear energy, and every time the coalition are in government. During the Howard era we had it, and then at the beginning of the Abbott era. Every time no one's prepared to come forward and say, I want to spend my money or my shareholders' money on this, because it would take a long time in terms of the investment, at least a decade. It won't solve today's energy crisis. And if you want to see how fast coalition members can run, go into a coalition party room and ask them who wants a nuclear power station in their electorate, and just watch them scutter out the door.
Something you said earlier today about the voice, about the responsibility of the media in terms of how we report it, the amplification of people perhaps who are saying, you know, we need more detail, therefore otherwise rather we can't vote for it. Isn't the problem here that we actually have almost too much, a flood of detail? We've had the Kalmar Langton review, we've had the Lisa Dodson inquiry, we've had the 2017 Uluru Statement from the Heart, and essentially there's a flood, not a vacuum. When will you put some more meat on the bones in terms of how this proceeds?
What I want to do is to give people the space to walk on this journey. That's what I'm doing very consciously, and I'm saying what I'm doing. Just like I said in 2019, what our plan was for the 2022 election, and we did what we said we would do. Just like in government, we're doing what we said we would do at that election. Here, I want to give people the space to consider the question that has been put out there and the 3-point constitutional change which is proposed, which would come after, of course, a preamble which recognises Indigenous people in the Constitution. What I don't want to do is to get ahead of that debate to the point whereby people can find one element in which they can disagree with. I respect people having different views on this. I want a national conversation, though. What I did on Saturday was provide a framework for that conversation to enable it to move forward. When we have, as you're aware, we will need a referendum. Legislation has to occur for that to advance. So there'll be a debate in the Parliament as well. As inevitably as part of that debate, there'll be discussion about the extensive work of Marcia Langton and Tom Calma, extensive debate about what a voice to Parliament might look like in terms of regional structures. There's a particular model being put forward by them that envisages a national model, but also with equal representation of male and female representatives, particular quarantining of representation to ensure remote communities are represented, and a regional structure as well. I welcome that debate, which will occur. That will be advanced during the legislative debate, which will determine when it's clearer what an appropriate date for a referendum should be. But I make this point. I want the debate to be very clear about what will be put to the Australian people, which I've proposed with supporters. They're not my words. I said that on Saturday. They're words that have been worked up by Indigenous and non-Indigenous people of goodwill, which is, do you support an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice being recognised in the Constitution? Sorry, guys, I've got question time, so thanks.